I found the letter by accident. It was wedged behind the stack of paper napkins I kept in the supply closet, the ones Victor always restocked without being asked. A white envelope, sealed, with no name on the front. Just a small blue anchor drawn in the corner, neat, precise, the kind of steady hand that belonged to someone who had spent years being careful. I stood there in my diner kitchen at 6 a.m, flour on my apron, the smell of the first coffee of the day filling the room, and I thought about whether to put it back. I should have put it back. Instead, I turned it over. On the other side, in the same careful handwriting, First National Private, Act 7741. Balance confirmation, $1.2 million. My hands weren't shaking exactly. It was more like the floor shifted slightly under my feet. I heard the back screen door open. Victor was returning from his morning walk, the same one he took every day at 5:45 before the breakfast rush began. I slid the envelope back where I'd found it and walked straight to the stove, picked up my spatula, and started turning bacon. I didn't need to turn. Let me go back. Because none of this makes sense without understanding how it started, and how a 63-year-old woman running a diner she couldn't afford to keep decided one rainy November morning to change both their lives without knowing it. I'd owned the Callaway Kitchen for 11 years by then. My husband Dale had always wanted us to open a place of our own. He spent 30 years as a line cook at other people's restaurants and swore up and down that someday it would be ours. We opened on a Thursday. Dale died on a Saturday. 14 months later, a heart attack at 61. He never got to see a single busy Sunday morning. My daughter Renee wanted me to sell immediately. She lives in Denver with her husband and 2 kids and has a very practical mind that I've always admired and occasionally found exhausting. Mom, you don't know how to run a business alone. Mom, you're going to burn yourself out. Mom, this was Dad's dream, not yours. She was half right. It had been Dale's dream. But somewhere in those 14 months of watching him build that place from nothing, it had become mine too. So I kept it. I hired a part-time cook and a couple of high school kids for the weekend rush, and I learned to do everything Dale had done, and most of what I hadn't known how to do before. By the time Victor showed up, I was managing, not thriving, managing. It was the second week of November. Early, still dark outside, the kind of cold that comes off Lake Erie and decides to stay. I'd arrived to open up and found a man sitting on the wooden bench I kept out front for customers waiting on takeout orders. He had a green army duffel bag between his boots, a canvas jacket that wasn't warm enough for the weather, and the posture of someone who hadn't slept in a bed recently. I almost walked past him. I had eggs to crack, and a grill to heat, and a produce delivery coming at 7, but I stopped. Something about the way he was sitting, very still, very upright, like a man who'd made a decision to maintain his dignity no matter what the circumstances required of him. Dale used to sit like that. "You eaten?" I asked. He looked up. Late 60s, I guessed. Silver hair cropped short. Eyes that were sharp and steady in a way that made you feel he was paying more attention to you than most people bothered to. "I'm fine," he said. "I didn't ask if you were fine. I asked if you'd eaten." A pause. "Not since yesterday." I held the door open. "Come in. Sit at the counter." He hesitated, then picked up his bag and followed me inside. I made him eggs and toast and a bowl of chili and put it in front of him without ceremony. He ate carefully, like a man who'd been taught that meals mattered. When he finished, he thanked me quietly and reached into his jacket for what I assumed was a wallet. "Don't," I said. "On me." He looked at me directly. "I don't take charity." "I know," I said. "That's why I have a proposition. My dishwasher quit 3 days ago. I've got a waitress who called in sick and a lunch rush coming at 11:30. If you can work a sink and carry plates without dropping them, I'll feed you for the day, and there's a storage room in back with a daybed my cook sleeps on during doubles. Warm, private, got its own bathroom." He was quiet for a moment. "What's your name?" "Dorothy Callaway. Everyone calls me Dot." "Victor," he said. He didn't offer a last name. "I can work a sink." That was how it started. Renee called that weekend and I made the mistake of mentioning it. She went very quiet in that particular way she has before she says something carefully. "Mom, you hired a man off the street. Off my bench, technically. That's not funny. Do you know anything about him? His background? His history? He could be dangerous." He's quiet, he works hard, and he washed every dish in that kitchen without being asked twice. Mom, please listen to me. You're 63 years old, you're alone out there, and you're letting a complete stranger sleep 20 feet from where you work. Can you hear how that sounds? It sounds like something your father would have done, I said, and she went quiet again, differently this time. She didn't approve, but she stopped arguing. Victor stayed. Within a month, he'd become as essential to the Callaway kitchen as the coffee machine. He was methodical, precise, and had a memory that startled me regularly. If a customer had been in 2 months ago and mentioned they didn't like cilantro, Victor remembered when they came back. He fixed the heating element on the reach-in cooler when the repairman quoted me $800. He rewired the sign out front so the K in kitchen stopped flickering. He reorganized my entire dry storage system in a single afternoon and showed me a spreadsheet, handwritten, that cut my ordering waste by almost 20%. I offered him more pay after the first month. He was getting $40 a day, and 3 meals I wanted to double it. The 40 is more than fair, he said. Victor, you're doing the work of 2 people. The 40 isn't. I'm not here for the money, Dot. Something about the way he said it closed the conversation. I let it go, the same way I could tell it had been let go before. My regulars started asking questions, the way small-town regulars do. Marge from the insurance office wondered if he was a relative. Gary, the feed store owner, asked if I was sure he checked out. I gave the same answer every time. He's a good man, he works hard, and what he needs right now is exactly what he's got. What I didn't say, because I didn't entirely have words for it yet, was that I understood something in Victor I recognized from my own mirror. That particular kind of stillness that looks like peace from the outside but is actually a person being very careful about how much they feel at any given moment. The management of grief. He'd lost something enormous. I didn't know what, but I knew the posture. The trouble with the diner started in year 2 of Victor being there. A national breakfast chain opened a location 20 minutes away, out by the highway. New, bright, cheap. My weekend numbers dropped first, then the weekday lunch crowd thinned. I told myself it would stabilize. It didn't. By spring, I was pulling from the personal savings account I'd kept separate, the one I thought of as my emergency fund. By summer, it was half gone. I didn't tell Victor. I didn't tell Renee. I kept opening at 5:30, kept smiling, kept making the biscuits from scratch the way Dale had insisted they be made. If I worked hard enough and cared enough, I'd been raised to believe things had a way of holding together. Then in September, the refrigeration unit in the main kitchen failed. The repair estimate was $11,000. The replacement estimate was $16,000. I had $4,000 in the business account. I sat in my car in the parking lot after the repair company left and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. I was 63 years old. My husband was gone. My savings were nearly gone. The thing I had kept alive for 11 years, because it was the last piece of the life Dale and I had built together, was going to be taken apart by a broken refrigerator. I went back inside and finished the afternoon service. Victor was closing down the grill when I finally came to stand in the kitchen doorway. I hadn't meant to say anything, but he looked over at me and stopped what he was doing. "Tell me," he said. That was all. So I told him. The refrigeration unit, the estimate, the account balance, all of it. I even told him about the personal savings, which I hadn't told anyone. There was something about Victor that made dishonesty feel like more effort than it was worth. He was quiet for a while. How long before it becomes critical? The repairman said I have maybe 2 weeks on the temporary fix. After that, I can't store anything safely. He nodded slowly. Let me make a call. Victor, I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking. That's not relevant. He picked up the dish towel he'd set down and folded it neatly over the oven handle. Give me 2 days. He was gone the next morning before I arrived. Didn't call, didn't leave a note. I spent that day doing the math I'd been avoiding, calculating which bills I could defer, which suppliers might work with me on terms, whether there was any version of this that ended with the diner still open in December. There wasn't. On the 3rd day, Victor came in at his usual time, sat down at the counter with a cup of coffee, and pushed a cashier's check across the surface toward me. $20,000. Victor. For the refrigeration unit, 3 months of operating buffer, and a small reserve. I pushed it back. I can't take this. He pushed it toward me again. You can, and you will. Where does a man who takes $40 a day have 20,000? I have resources, he said quietly. From before. I looked at the check. I looked at him. Before what? Before all this, he said, with a small gesture that seemed to mean everything and nothing. Please, Dot, take it. Fix the refrigerator. Keep your diner open. I held the check for a long moment. I thought about Dale. I thought about those Sunday mornings. I took the check. I told myself I'd ask questions later. The truth is, I was afraid of what I'd learn. And I was afraid that whatever I learned would make me feel differently about the man I'd spent 2 years trusting completely. 2 weeks later, I found the letter. After that, I couldn't sleep. I went through everything I'd noticed about Victor over 2 years and held each detail up to this new light. The way he once looked at the medical supply catalog I used for the first aid kit we kept behind the counter and said, without thinking, those forceps are outdated. There are better options now. The morning a customer came in describing symptoms, and Victor listened, asked 2 quiet questions, and said carefully that it might be worth seeing someone about that, and described exactly which kind of specialist. The handwriting. That handwriting. The precision of everything he did. I'm not proud of what I did next. I Googled his name. I tried a few combinations. Victor, physician, the approximate age, the careful hands, the anchor on the envelope. It took me 3 searches. Dr. Mine. Victor James Morrow, retired. Formerly Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Cleveland Clinic. Nationally recognized. Published. Decorated. Net worth, per a years-old profile in a medical journal, estimated at over $1 million from patents, consulting, and a lifetime of careful saving. 68 years old. I sat with my laptop in my kitchen at midnight, and I went through every page I could find. The articles stopped abruptly 5 years ago. The last one I found wasn't about awards or publications. It was a brief item in a Cleveland paper. A young man, 29 years old, had died following a cardiac procedure. His name was Thomas Morrow. He was a resident at a different hospital across the city. He was Victor's son. The procedure had been routine. The attending had been inexperienced. The error was administrative as much as medical. A missed contraindication in the chart. A decision made too quickly. Thomas Morrow had died on a Thursday morning in February, and his father, one of the foremost cardiac surgeons in the country, had been 2 floors away in his own operating room when it happened. I closed the laptop. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I waited until the breakfast rush was done, and the kitchen was quiet before I said anything. Victor was restocking the coffee station, his back to me. Cleveland Clinic, I said. He went very still. Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. Dr. Victor Morrow. He didn't turn around for a long moment. When he did, his expression was careful and unreadable in that way I'd come to know meant he was deciding how much to let through. You looked me up, he said. I found the letter. I wasn't snooping. It was in the supply closet. But then yes, I looked you up. He nodded slowly. He pulled out the stool behind the counter and sat down heavily, like something he'd been carrying for a long time had gotten briefly heavier. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't owe me anything, Victor. But I'd like to understand. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I went and poured us both coffee and sat down across the counter. Thomas was 29, he said finally. He wanted to be a surgeon since he was 8 years old. Followed me around the hospital on take-your-child-to-work days, read my textbooks, asked questions that embarrassed residents twice his age. He looked at his coffee. He matched at a good program. Was in his 2nd year. They said he had the instincts, that he was going to be extraordinary. I didn't say anything. I spent 40 years fixing hearts, Victor said. Thousands of procedures. I saved people's lives, and I was good at it, and I knew I was good at it. And then my son died from a preventable error in a cardiac unit 2 miles from mine, and I could not, he stopped, started again. I could not make that mean anything. All those years, all that skill, all that certainty that what I did mattered. And I couldn't save my own son. What about his mother? I asked gently. Anna passed 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was Thomas and me for the last 3 years of his residency. We had dinner every Sunday when he wasn't on call. He looked up. After he died, I tried to keep working. Lasted 4 months. Then I handed in my resignation and drove out of Cleveland with whatever was in the car and didn't stop for a very long time. How long were you on the road? 8 months, give or take. I slept in the car, in shelters when it was cold enough. I didn't want to use money. I wanted to know what I was without the title, without the position, without the white coat. He looked around the diner. And then I found this place. Found you. And for the first time in a long time, I had somewhere to be in the morning that needed me. I felt the pressure behind my eyes that I'd been holding back since the night before. Victor, I've been paying you $40 a day. Something close to a smile crossed his face. I know. I've been feeding you soup and leftover pie and worrying about whether you were warm enough. I know that too. He looked at me directly. And Dot, I want you to understand something. Every bit of it was exactly what I needed. Not the money, not the status. Being needed, being useful, waking up and knowing this kitchen wouldn't run as smoothly without me. That mattered. That was the thing I'd lost. He paused. You gave that back to me. We sat with that for a while. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you treated me like a man who deserved a chance. Not like a famous surgeon, not like a grieving father, not like some eccentric wealthy man playing at poverty for his own reasons. Just like a person who showed up and needed a meal and was willing to work for it. He shook his head. Do you know how rarely that happens? Once you know who someone is, you can never quite treat them like just a person again. I thought about Dale. About how after he was diagnosed, every conversation changed. How people started speaking carefully around him, as if the disease was standing next to him, listening. How he'd told me one night that the thing he missed most was someone just asking him about baseball. I understand that, I said. I know you do. That's why I stayed. Renee found out, of course. She found out because I told her 2 weeks after that conversation on a Sunday call. I'd decided that keeping secrets from my daughter was something I was too old and too tired to do anymore. She was silent for so long that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Mom, you've had a retired cardiothoracic surgeon with $1 million in savings washing your dishes for 2 years. He also reorganized my dry storage and fixed the sign. That is not the point. Renee. Mom, do you know who he is? I'm looking him up right now. He's in the National Academy of Medicine. He has over 200 published papers. I know who he is, I said quietly. I've known for a few weeks, but I've known him for 2 years, and those are two different things. She paused. Are you saying you knew him better before you knew who he was? I'm saying I knew the part that mattered before I knew the part that the world decided to put on a plaque. Another long silence. Mom? Are you okay? This is a lot. I'm okay, I said. And I meant it, which surprised me a little. Victor and I talked seriously about the diner the following week. He wanted to help. Not out of pity, he made that clear, but because he'd been part of building it back up over 2 years, and he had a stake in it now. We drew up a proper partnership agreement, Renee insisted. She called 3 times about it, and Victor invested enough to replace the refrigeration unit, upgrade the kitchen equipment, and cover a 6-month operating reserve. But more than the money, he brought something else. He'd spent 40 years in a hospital, which meant he'd spent 40 years watching people sit with bad news, with fear, with the particular loneliness of waiting rooms. He had a way with the regulars that went beyond remembering their orders. He remembered their lives. He asked after the things they'd mentioned 3 visits ago. Gary from the feed store, whose wife had been sick, Victor always asked how she was doing, remembered which treatments she was trying, knew enough to ask the right questions without making it feel clinical. Marge, who was quietly terrified about her retirement finances, Victor sat with her one slow Tuesday afternoon and spent an hour going through the actual numbers with her, the kind of clear-headed conversation she'd been paying an advisor not to have. The diner became a different kind of place. Still the same biscuits, same booths with the cracked vinyl I kept patching, same hand-lettered menu board. But something in the atmosphere shifted. Word spread. The way word spreads in small towns through no particular mechanism anyone can name. People started coming in who hadn't been in years. Sunday mornings filled back up. I watched all of this and thought about Dale, how he would have loved it, how he always said a diner wasn't really about the food. About 6 months after our conversation, I arrived one morning to find Victor at the counter with a cup of coffee and an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something careful and nervous at the same time. "Thomas had a wife," he said, without preamble. I sat down. "Tell me, Diane." They'd been married 2 years when he died. She reached out to me. Last month, through a mutual colleague who apparently found me by asking around. He looked at his hands. I didn't respond for 3 weeks. "Why not?" "Because I left," he said simply. "After Thomas died, I disappeared. I didn't attend his anniversary service. I didn't call Diane on his birthday. I was so consumed by my own loss that I simply removed myself from every person who might remind me of it, including a young woman who had just lost her husband and needed her father-in-law." His voice was level, but it cost him to keep it that way. "That's not something I'm proud of." "Does she have children?" He looked up. "A son. His name is Daniel. He's 4. Thomas's son." He paused. "My grandson, who I have never met." I was quiet for a moment. What did Diane's message say? That she doesn't hold anything against me. That she'd been thinking about reaching out for a long time. That Daniel asks about his grandfather and she doesn't know what to tell him. He stopped. She said she thinks Thomas would want Daniel to know me. The thing about grief, I've learned, is that it doesn't diminish in a straight line. It diminishes in lurches. Sometimes you feel fine for weeks, and then something small breaks you open completely. Victor's face in that moment was not the face of a man who had been grieving for 5 years. It was the face of a man who had just opened a door he'd nailed shut and found it was a door to something he hadn't known he was still hoping for. "Call her," I said. "The diner." "Victor, you've been short-staffed since." "Victor, go be this child's grandfather. The diner has managed without people before, and it will manage without you for however long this takes. Go." He met my eyes. His were wet, which was the first and only time I saw that in 2 years. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Nobody does," I said. "You show up and you figure it out. That's all anyone knows how to do." He left 4 days later, drove to Columbus where Diane had settled, and was gone for 2 weeks. He called once, brief, to say things were going slowly but okay. When he came back, he sat down at the counter the same way he had the morning all of this began, but everything in him was different. Lighter, the only word that fits, like something had been redistributed. He put his phone on the counter and showed me a photograph. A little boy, dark-haired, sitting in Victor's lap with a picture book open between them, both of them looking at the page, the boy's finger pointing at something. Victor's face in profile, wearing an expression I hadn't seen there before. "He calls me Pop Pop," Victor said, very quietly. "Already. Just decided on it by himself." I didn't try to say anything. I just looked at that photo for a long time. "Diane's good," he said. "She's strong. She built a life. Thomas would have been proud of her." He picked up the phone. "She wants to bring Daniel here in the spring. Let him see the diner, see where I've been. He can help restock the napkins," I said. "You'll want to train him young." Victor laughed. Actually laughed, full and easy, and I realized I'd never heard that sound from him before. Things settled into a different shape after that. Victor started spending time in Columbus once a month, sometimes more. He moved out of the storage room finally, at my repeated insistence, and into a rented apartment 2 streets from the diner. He still worked his shifts. Still folded the dish towels in that precise way. Still reorganized things that didn't need reorganizing. Still remembered every regular's order and the name of every person they'd ever mentioned. Renee came in October with my grandkids, which she'd started doing more often since all of this began, as if understanding that her mother was more rooted here than she'd known. She and Victor sat in a booth for almost an hour while I ran the lunch service, and when she came to find me in the kitchen, her eyes were red. "He told me about Thomas," she said. "I know, Mom. She stopped. "He's good people. I know that too." She hugged me from behind while I was stirring the soup pot, which she hasn't done since she was about 12 years old. "Dad would have liked him," she said. "Very much," I said. "I'm 65 now. The Callaway kitchen is still open. It's not just surviving anymore there are Fridays. I run out of the special before 2 o'clock, which is a problem Dale always said he wanted to have. Victor is still here, still working, still the first person through the back door most mornings." He calls Daniel every night at 7, and Daniel has apparently decided that his pop works in the most important place in the world, which is a diner, which has biscuits. Some mornings when the early rush is done and the diner goes quiet for that half hour before the lunch crowd builds, Victor pours 2 cups of coffee and we sit in the booth by the window where you can see the old water tower and the edge of the park beyond it, and we talk. About Dale, about Thomas and Anna, about what it means to lose the life you thought you were building and find yourself standing in the middle of an entirely different one that turned out to be worth keeping. About a boy named Daniel, who calls his grandfather Pop and already, at 4 years old, can identify 17 different kinds of birds from a picture book that lives permanently in the front booth. I think about that November morning sometimes, the cold coming off the lake. The man sitting on my bench with a canvas jacket that wasn't warm enough, holding himself perfectly upright, the moment I almost walked past him. My daughter thought I was reckless. My regulars thought I was naive. Maybe both things were true. But here is what I know now that I didn't know then. The people we let in during our worst winters are not always who they appear to be. Sometimes, the person you think you're rescuing has already survived things you can barely imagine. Sometimes, the hand you reach out in a moment of pure instinct grabs yours right back and holds on, and what you build together in the space between 2 broken lives is steadier than anything either of you could have built alone. The sign out front doesn't flicker anymore. The kitchen runs well. On Sunday mornings, the parking lot fills up early, and sometimes a small, dark-haired boy sits on the tall stool behind the counter and watches everything very seriously, the way his grandfather does, with those sharp, careful eyes that miss nothing. I still make the biscuits from scratch. Dale's way. The right way. Some things you hold on to. Some things hold on to you.